how do we address the mental health of that kind of form of trauma, which drives so much activism, but also can be quite dangerous as well?
If you feel so strongly about something, it gets you out of bed in the morning, speak about it, start the thing, but find your people, because you're not the only person who's experienced it. Get your people, and with more people around the table, the thing drives forward more. Yeah. I was like, okay, I know the technology exists to make this easier. Why has it not made it to the mental health space? To ultimately find something that is successful, making a difference, huge impact, it needs to outlive you. I think for societally conditioned reasons, we feel like we have to do it alone. We feel like if we don't do it, who will? And there's literally like constant quotes about that, right? Like, if not you, who? If not now, when? You will actually get further, bigger, more successful if you're not alone, and if you have the balance.
So really glad to have Alyssa with us here today at the School of Social Justice. We're going to go straight into it. Alyssa, you have had a career of really fighting for folk who might have faced some really deep issues mentally, but also societally. Yeah. As a social worker, you've just talked about how you were a community organiser as well, and today it would be amazing to hear a bit more about your story, kind of how you ended up here, and how you ended up helping over 28 million people around the world with your work. First off, it would be great to hear about your story and kind of like who you are and where you're from and where you grew up.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here. I'm so moved by this effort and these videos, and I think this content is hugely important, especially now. And it's hard to say where a story really begins. I am 30. I very much identify with my ancestors and my roots. So am I 30? Am I 300? I don't know.
Interesting.
And to that end, I definitely have roots in Eastern Europe. I have family that has immigrated over just before and post the Holocaust. So I have come to find, as I've grown, that I've always been really drawn to social impact and to helping others. In a deep way, it's felt a bit more like a compulsion than a choice. I've always...
Because of your family
history? I think so.
Mm.
And I think, through my own therapy and reflection, I think I've come to find that. And for a long time, I always knew I was really drawn to social impact and to helping people. I didn't always know why. And I think the why is constantly evolving. But certainly from a young age, I was like the kid that had the lemonade stand or had the fundraising effort for any given natural disaster or international relief effort.
Were your parents involved in that as well? Like, were they quite active?
No. My family's been very quiet. I think a very common response to having to hold quite a bit of pain and healing and trauma is sometimes you pendulum swing and you become an advocate and you go out and you want to reduce that pain for other people. And sometimes as a survival mechanism, you just have to withhold it and you just have to contain it or dissociate from it and create an existence that is calm, cool, and collected, which was very much my parents' approach.
I'd say you're calm, cool, collected as well. You're quite,
I like to think
it's your leadership style as well.
Yeah, for sure.
You make people feel good around you as well.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So my parents were very, growing up, I thought my career options were doctor, lawyer, teacher. My father was a doctor. My mother was a lawyer. She stepped away from law and retired when she had children, and then she ultimately supported my father in his medical practice. She became his practice manager of sorts and did all the admin and operations, and it's really the brains behind the operation. She was a strong female role model for me.
Yeah.
But emotionally, between the two of them, very little focus on what was wrong and much more focus and discussion around what was going right and building the future. And they never really dictated for my brothers, and I have two older brothers, what we could or should do, but they always emphasized, you can do whatever you want. Go do whatever you want. We support you. We believe in you.
And would you say that kind of mentality and that thing instilled of you at a young age was a large part of how you got to where you are today?
100%. Yeah. I think it really built confidence that I could go do whatever I wanted. And I remember having this discussion quite a bit with peers in my late teens, early 20s, that in a way that I don't think any parents really ever intend, and a way that's actually quite privileged, is it does instill a little bit of pressure of, well, if you can do anything, what should you do? And I think for the millennial and Gen Z generations, there's a bit of an added layer of wanting what you do to be meaningful and to drive purpose and to help others. I think for generations past, your vocation was very much a financial security decision. You'd say, hey, what am I good at? What can I do? What do I have access to? And will the results of that generate enough money to get a roof over my head, food over my head, and college for my children? Done.
The
like,
standards,
end of sentence.
That's what you need, the minimum, the necessary. I mean, that's really interesting though, because kind of the dream job maybe when I was at university was everybody wanted to be an investment banker. Everybody, the pinnacle was going to Goldman Sachs because it was about getting the highest paid internship and the highest paid grad job. And then recently, from what I've seen, is okay, now it's about big tech. It's all about kind of Apple, Google, Facebook, Instagram, you know, all of those kind of cool companies, and even new ones like TikTok. And one of the things that I'm really curious about is how these industries make those industries and those jobs really kind of exciting. But there's a whole bunch of folk who are doing jobs in non-profits which don't have the budgets to kind of hype up the work, the job. They don't have the salaries to offer. But as you say, they add something which is meaningful. And I've had a career, you know, in the third sector, non-profit sector. You actually just mentioned you worked as a community organiser. I'd love to hear more about that side of your life as well.
I've always been really driven by meaning. And when I started university, I went to Northwestern as a biomedical engineer. And my biggest, you know, when I was a junior and senior in high school, when you're going to college and you're preparing for what do you want to do, what programs do you want to apply to, I didn't have a whole lot of people giving me concrete advice at the time, but I was strong in math and science. So I asked my chemistry teacher, what should I do? And he said, you're a woman, you should go be an engineer because there are so few women doing it. You earn a really good living and you're strong in math and science, so you can do it. So I only applied to engineering programs. I thought I would make prosthetic limbs for war victims who had lost an arm or a leg to bombings and I got to school. I was like a hyper perfectionist at the time. I'm a lifelong recovering perfectionist, I'd say, but I'm much more boundaried and much more fluid with it now. But so I entered not just an engineering program, but an honors math and science program. And started school, I was in like physics, chem, math, and then public speaking. Wound up feeling totally overwhelmed in my math and science classes and totally like in awe and so fulfilled and excited in my public speaking class. And my peers were the exact opposite. My engineering peers loved the math and science. I kid you not, I would open my chemistry textbook and just like start crying. I'd say like letters I didn't know. I'd like,
it's just so hard.
So hard. I felt like totally unprepared. And in public speaking, felt the exact opposite. I was like coaching peers through performance anxiety and social anxiety, and it just came really naturally to me.
So you found your talent by figuring out what you don't like.
Yes.
And you were like, this thing makes more sense to me. Great.
And a little bit of like the good side of comparison to other peers. Like there's so much toxic comparison on social media, but in this way, being immersed and surrounded by other people who like so obviously loved this one thing that I did not, and so obviously hated this other thing that I really liked, I was like, oh, I think I may actually be like on the wrong track. Like I don't resonate with this like this roadmap of where things are at. And I went and I talked to a bunch of other engineering majors who admitted that in their senior year or in their first job, they started doing stuff they really liked. But in the first 3 years of university, they felt very much like they're like shackled to the curriculum that they hated. And I was like, well, I don't feel so strongly about engineering to like give 3 years of my life to be like, feel like I like can't do, like feel so bogged down. So I switched, and then I wound up getting really involved in it was called CESP.
CESP.
SESP.
SESP.
It's like the School of Education and Social Policy at
Oh, wow.
Northwestern. I think
I mean,
we
that
can
just sounds
fact
like a
check.
School of Social Justice. We need to connect.
Yeah, exactly. We can fact check the acronym,
Yeah.
but there was a couple of like long history community organizers there who were teaching. I got really involved. I did a summer program volunteering at Cure Violence is what it was called.
Cure Violence. Okay.
And
What were you doing there?
they were all about violence reduction in Chicago and in the areas of Chicago that were the most plagued by gang violence, juvenile detention, wrongful imprisonment, wrongful arrests, wrongful imprisonment. And just did a deep dive and was like so moved by people who, speaking of compensation, had like 30 plus year careers where they'd impacted millions and millions of lives, but they weren't driven by the salary. They weren't driven by, so I actually think—
What drove them?
I think they felt a real deep human connection to the people that they were working with. And I think they had realized that they had an opportunity via the platforms they had access to, whether it was being a professor at a private university, whether it was their race. A lot of these people were white people who were advocating on behalf of largely Black adolescent men, Black and Latinx. So I think there was a little bit of a coming to of, oh, well, if I have certain outlets and access and networks, how can I leverage those advantages towards social good?
I mean, I wouldn't have thought that because, like, you know, as I mentioned, one of my first jobs I ever did was being a community organizer, and we were working on the living wage campaign. And one of the criticisms being there was that there were a lot of middle-class folk. And I went to a great school, great university, but was sort of born and raised working class. But one of the criticisms from the community leaders who we were working with, who were very diverse, was sort of saying, who are these kind of Oxbridge, Oxford, Cambridge students coming into our neighborhoods and telling us what we need to do? I mean, when it comes to social impact, what do you think about that, where we've got people from different parts of the world? I mean, I was from Plaistow, East London, going into North London. Even that was kind of like, you're from East, we're from North. What does that kind of, do you have any response to that, and kind of what it means to help others, particularly given your work now? I'd love to discuss that a bit more about the mental health side.
So I definitely have a lifelong, I need to forever reflect on, understand, unpack like a white savior complex, essentially. And I think a lot of white people do. I think we need to understand, is it like a blind performative behavior that is one and done, or largely trying to drive our own brand or a benefit for ourselves? Or is it trying to leverage what it's driving at? What is the why behind our behavior, and what ultimately is the outcome? Is it a story or social media post or et cetera that is a one and done, that's like, okay, you get all this applause and all this affirmation, but then ultimately the problem at hand hasn't changed? And how much are you standing and speaking as though you know it and you've lived it if you haven't? And how many people have you consulted with or brought in or shared the platform with or given the platform to who are actually living and breathing the experience? And that, I think, is some of what's so necessary. Like, we admittedly at MyWellBeing last May for Mental Health Awareness Month, we worked with a couple of different brands on an effort called Better Together. We raised about $50,000 to provide free mental health care for people of color.
Amazing.
Which was amazing. Really However, what we found was that because that effort is not the absolute core of what we do all day, every day, it wound up costing a bit of marketing, awareness efforts, et cetera, to get the word out that that resource was even available.
Okay, got it.
So what we found was that even though our intention was really good, it may have been better, may have been bigger impact, may have been more authentic to actually raise the money and donate it, or give it to someone who all day, every day, all they do is free care for any given group that really needs it right now, whether it's like the absolute lowest socioeconomic status, whether it's Black and brown communities or Black and brown women. Because what happened was, okay, we did this thing, but then there were places that had wait lists of people waiting to access care, and we actually had to generate that traffic. So we did, and we were able to give back, but it was a real eye-opening moment of, even though it's not what we intended, was that effort ultimately performative? Was it like just to do a thing? Would it have been better? And we always try to think, we always do retros and try to say, okay, so moving forward, if ultimately like impact and helping people is the desired outcome, was that actually the best way to do that? Or is there a better way that involves more people who are, you know, truly living and breathing these efforts?
I'm just going, that's a really helpful kind of example of how sort of big societal issues can impact sort of companies, organizations, communities. And actually, sometimes what's needed is a bit of tension. I mean, you'll know this community organizer, right? You need a bit of tension, you need a bit of conversation, you need dialogue.
100%.
I mean, in a democracy, dialogue and the ability to have different viewpoints is necessary for progress. And it's really good that you've kind of taken that approach of evaluating you know, what interventions really have in terms of an impact on people who are intended to.
And I think the other thing I'd say about people coming in is I think it's important to know what all is it that you're doing and to set expectations with the participants on both sides, meaning the people coming in and the people receiving. Because I'd say I've had the privilege to have a number of opportunities where I've done, call it 10-week or 30-week programs that have completely changed my perspective and career trajectory. However, there's a huge flaw in that it ends. So what happens when the benefit's largely mine in some ways, meaning I go in, my perspective has changed, and then I leave and I go back to my life and I go back to, versus what would it look like, what's the sustainability of that? Is there a smooth handoff to whoever replaces me and or the group? Is there a keep in touch effort? If you're mentoring, what happens to the mentee after you leave? Do you go deep and then all of a sudden you pull out the support and they're like, well, that was cute, but like, okay, I got 10 weeks of mentoring, and then what happens from there?
It's sort of like suddenly the cliff. But if you were to stay that from the very beginning and have a proper transition plan, that really helps. I mean, for me, like, what's clear is there are big problems that society faces. We need the best talent. We need the smartest people in the room. We need people who have lived experience. We need people from all walks of life tackling these issues. And I think when folk come in and have the intention of helping, there needs to be that understanding, as you say, and that constant learning and that shared understanding about the dynamics that are at play. But I think we need to create a place where people feel not only free to get involved, but to be really excited about getting involved.
100%.
Because the last thing you want is a place where we've got all these non-profits and these charities doing great work, but people of talent are scared to kind of go in. And there are amazing people already with talent, but we need to get new, consistent people coming in. And so for the school, that's what we're trying to do, right? Get folk to learn about these kinds of issues. I mean, you're obviously now a huge, advocate for ensuring kind of whole body, whole mind, whole spirit kind of mental health. And health in general. I mean, we were in the gym yesterday and I see you like working out hard. You not only talk about it, but you live kind of your work. Tell us a bit about your work, and I'd love to then talk about a bit what we talked about in the bus and how there's the differences between different groups. But very generally, what is it that you do?
So I founded MyWellBeing just shy of about 5 years ago, and the core of what we do is we help people find the right therapist or coach for them. And something that I realized first person, which is part of why big reason why I started MyWellBeing, is that so much chemistry and rapport is integral to whether therapy works. And I've looked for a therapist in many periods of my life. I've had anxiety for as long as I can remember. Literally, as a baby, I was a colicky baby.
What's a colicky baby?
It's like you have stomach aches and you cry all the time, like you're in physical discomfort. And so as a baby, I obviously didn't have, rational, this event happened, so I'm anxious about it.
Got it.
But I had a body-based anxiety. I tend to associate mind and body to how our mind is. So from that age onward, I was very particular. I wanted to do the best thing. I was very competitive as an athlete.
Oh, you're an athlete. Okay.
I always worked really hard in school and was very, grades oriented. Took my friendships really seriously. I really wanted to be there for people. So it's a ton of pressure, and a lot of high performers feel that way. So I had looked on and off, and the friction in the search process always stopped me. Someone wouldn't call me back and be like, I'm fine. Like, I'm good enough. It's not an emergency. I'll just look later. 2 years pass. Then I re-pick it up, right? So this time, I really took my therapist search much more seriously when I was training to become a therapist.
Okay, yeah. Because you kind of see who's there and you see what to look out for.
Yeah, and I didn't want to be a therapist without ever having been in my own therapy. So I wanted to know, what's the client experience like? What's happening on the other side of the table or the couch? Like, how can I really empathize with, in that first session, was it feel like to start opening up or not? And then, I really committed to calling until I got my appointment, pursuing appointments until I found the right fit.
Okay. Yeah.
Took me better part of, I probably called 50 people.
50, wow.
It took me better part of 6 months to find someone. And then even when I found someone, I might have been seeing someone for a year and a half. And then only to find at that point, maybe they weren't totally the right fit. Or I'd see someone else who in a couple sessions would say something mega or not so mega offensive. And I'd be like, that's kind of weird. I'm not going to keep seeing you. So all of which to say, at the same time, I was training to become a therapist. And I had all this empathy for, okay, here I am. I'm looking proactively, and I know what the acronyms mean. I know what the different styles are. I know broadly what I'm looking for, and still it's taking me all this time, all this effort, all this endurance. If I were mid-panic attack or mid-depressive episode or mid-binge eating, there's no way. You have one no, and you're like, no thanks. Actually, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to go about my way. So being someone who uses technology and tends to like technology despite its pros and cons. I've ordered the world's best burrito on Seamless. I've taken Uber and Lyft. I was like, okay, I know the technology exists to make this easier. Why has it not made it to the mental health space? I think stigma was a really big reason. I think mental health being this do good, the nonprofit vibe that we talked about was a big it wasn't sexy. It wasn't the world's best minds weren't orienting toward mental health. And those who were clinicians. So they were absolutely brilliant clinically, but not necessarily on the tech or the business side, or not necessarily. So I was like, I actually think I'm in a unique position to blend these two. And I had so much learning to do on exactly what that meant, but had the enthusiasm and commitment to go and do it. So that's a little bit about what we do. And for sure, we found that entry point is so important to people.
For sure.
Finding the right fit is so important that now we've also invested quite a bit in training providers, because over the years we found that some mental health providers...
So the trainers of your group of mental health experts.
Yeah,
and therapists.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, because we found the formal mental health training is comprehensive from a clinical perspective. Often the most severe symptomology. So you do get training in substance use, eating disorders, different therapy techniques, suicidal ideation. But what about burnout, dating, self-esteem, imposter syndrome?
These are big real things.
You're in a relationship. Do I marry this person or do I break up with this person? I feel like I'm dating someone X amount of months. I'm at a fork. So
and actually, those are the two times. The 2 times I went to therapy first time were after breakups. I was at university, it was undergrad, never really knew about therapy, grew up in a very religious household, so whenever I'd had a problem and turned to mum would be like, pray. And prayer would have a big impact, but for me, like I moved away from my faith, and it was quite difficult to figure out a way to solve these kind of big things of heartbreak and feeling so sad when someone tells you they love you, and then later on you break up and you question what love is. And so that was the first time I reached out to a therapist, because at university it was for free.
Yeah.
So I got a few sessions for free, and then it kind of stopped after a while, and it was really sad because I found it very helpful.
Yeah.
And then another breakup happened a few years later whilst I was doing my master's, and had a similar thing, right? Free kind of counselling for students, which is very helpful, because for folk like myself and others who might not necessarily be the most wealthiest of folk who can afford mental health support, that was crucial at a point where, as you say, crisis happens and you don't have anyone else to turn to, because you've spoken to your friends at length. We have to protect our friends too, and our family can only go so far. We need expert help. And it was only recently, years later now, that I've had a career which enables me to afford therapy, that I've had weeks of therapy, particularly during the lockdown. Yeah. And it was so helpful, because I was able to find, like you, I interviewed, not 50, but I think I interviewed like 15 people, and just getting a sense of a vibe. Yeah. And the person who helped me out, she's amazing. And I was so glad to find her. But many folk that I know who are not only can't find a therapist, but they're afraid to even start.
Yes.
And I think in the worlds that I'm kind of operating in, and some of the people I'm friends with, there is that stigma, right? Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, even talked about mental health during the lockdown. Yeah. And he was never able to say he saw a therapist. He was saying he saw his friend who was a doctor whilst they were playing tennis. And then he talked about Lincoln's kind of, I'm trying to remember Abraham Lincoln's, how he described depression. But then you've got like Winston Churchill's Black Dog, I think is what it was called. Big leaders in powerful positions who, if they were to be open about the mental health problems, would face a lot of criticism. Do you think that's changing now in terms of public figures? We're right now in a place surrounded by a bunch of young leaders, and with your work you've helped literally millions of people. Do you think there's a shift now in the acceptance of mental health as something that is like going to the GP and dealing with your a hurt ankle?
I think we're at a really meaningful inflection point where I definitely see a huge shift, and I think the more that millennials and Gen Z and younger are entering the workforce, entering leadership positions, there's more and more not just acceptance, but insistence almost, which on sharing and being authentic and being vulnerable, which I think comes with its own challenges.
What challenge? What kind of challenges?
I think people who maybe they have or they aspire to having a social media presence, or they have or they aspire to having a leadership position, depending on the field, they might feel like, oh, well, they need to share. If they're not ready to share, or they don't quite know how to verbalize sharing, or they don't have the support systems they need to cushion that sharing, to lead up to sharing in a way that actually is authentic for them, or coming down from sharing. Sometimes when you share, you can have in person or virtually this really visceral sense of connection and a warmth, like a full body, like wow, like such a meaningful human experience. And then if that just drops off, sort of similar to, maybe you've heard of Olympic athletes who have their moment, they get their gold or their silver, their bronze, and then they come down and they're like, what's next, what's now, like what's to come. So that after period can be scary, intimidating. You might share and be all in on sharing, and then have some fear, like, oh, what are people going to think of me? What's the backlash? So I think it's so beautiful and powerful to share, but also you don't have to share. And I think what's most important is to really honor where you're at. And even if you share next year or 5 years from now, great. Or that you can be authentic about the range of your experiences or having a hard time without necessarily going into nitty-gritty detail. Or you can go there if that is true.
I mean, so in community organising and in the world of social justice, there are so many folk who have become active in these spaces. People protest because they might have experienced kind of a criminal justice matter where, or like stops and searched, or stops and frisked, as they say in America, like hundreds of times. or might have had a childhood trauma,
Yeah.
which pushes them to campaign when they feel like they're more ready to campaign and build movements. With all of that there, oftentimes there's a lot of trauma within the room of inactivism, right?
Yeah.
Which means that there's a lot of hurt and pain in the room of people who are organising together. How do we address the mental health of that kind of form of trauma, which drives so much activism, but also can be quite dangerous as well?
Yeah, I think so. I've often heard the phrase "turning pain into power."
Okay, what's that mean, and where have you heard that, and what can you give examples?
I've heard it many times, in the BLM movement and in community organizing in general, that sometimes you can channel some of the pain you're experiencing into something that is generative. So if you channel it into a cause that you really believe in, it can make meaning of the pain, and sometimes that can be very healing in itself. I do think it's extremely important to ensure that those who are organizing, whether it's as a group, they all go in on some mental health support, or I'm obviously, a huge advocate of having formal therapists or coaches there whose job it is to hold and facilitate some of that pain moving through and releasing. But
wait, so mental health kind of trained experts within the activist base. Is there such a thing as that? Is that growing? Okay, interesting.
I think sometimes it can come with an expense. So even if the budget is limited, which it often is in community organizing, one of the things that I've often carried with me is there is a very real body tension associated with mounting stress and mounting trauma. So everybody seeking catharsis for that in a way that resonates with them, even if it's together, great. If it's on their own time, great. But it can be dancing, running, literally shaking, just like before or after your shower, just like shaking your limbs without like reserve, right? No one's looking or watching, just like flail around and let it loose.
Just like now.
Because it gets stuck, and especially if you're on a computer all day, it gets stuck, and you're sitting here and it's like all the stress is here. And most animals have no choice but to like seize, literally, like they have a traumatic event and they seize, and it releases the tension. And humans have overridden that through rational cognitive thought, where we don't sit around and shake. Generally, we do go dancing, and we do like go to the gym.
I go boxing.
You go to boxing.
You do your Peloton,
But sometimes those things will get deprioritized, or they'll seem frivolous, or they'll seem like a luxury. And again, there's one world where it's like a fancy luxury gym membership, even if you can't afford that, to just like outside the shower, just like shake a bit, or do jumping jacks, or do whatever, right? So I think that is so important. And I do also think, in order for these causes to have the longevity that they need to be things that, I think, if someone is leading the cause or participating or etc., and this is related to also like, who's this random middle class person coming in and telling us?
But not only middle class, because I've seen, particularly during lockdown, so many leaders who have kind of had to hold it, because definition of leaders, in community organizing terms, is having a following and you having to make decisions on behalf of our group, but they're holding extra kind of problems, and they've broken down. Like a lot of them are broken down, which means there's this sort of group of leaders who have done so much for 10 years, and now they just can't do anything because they feel kind of paralyzed almost by some of those problems. I mean, how do we ensure we protect folk who are doing this hard work?
So I strongly recommend reading the book called Burnout. It talks through, it is very informally written, it's very accessible, it's very human, and it talks through some of the science in a very accessible way of what is burnout and how do you prevent it proactively, or if you're in it, how do you combat, how do you recover. I burnt out really hard roughly maybe 1 year into running MyWellBeing. And
what happened?
So I would say, based on societal conditioning, I was just like churning out work. I was working probably, if not 24/7, like 20 27. Like, you know, I wasn't sleeping as much as I needed.
30 hours in a day, yeah.
I was doing early mornings, late evenings. I had sacrificed much of my social, personal, romantic life. No, and none of it was like an active conscious choice. I was so driven by the cause. It was workaholism. I got so much validation, affirmation, drive from my work that I didn't proactively set aside the time and boundaries to take care of myself. And then one day I woke up and my anxiety had shifted from something that there was an event that was making me anxious, or there was a conversation, or there was a specific thing, to all of a sudden my body was rejecting everything. I couldn't sleep even when I tried to, couldn't eat, had like zero appetite. I viscerally remember I ate like 2 pieces of toasted eggs. It was all I could stomach.
That's it.
And, you know, wound up going on runs because I was trying so hard to just like come back to baseline. And ultimately, what I would say to everyone is like, the comeback from that was so much longer than the proactive investment in preventing it would have been. And there's science behind that the ramp up can be quicker, and the sharp, you know, activation of burnout can be really quick, and then the recovery period has a really long wavelength. But if you proactively invest in preventing, you can create space to you need the catharsis regularly, or it will catch up to you. It's a non-negotiable.
I've seen so many, one very close friend had to go through something like this last year, and it was one of the most toughest periods I've had to go through as a friend, to see that.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was just, as you say, working so hard, trying to cheat sleep.
Yes.
And sleep seems to be a huge thing, which some people think they can cheat and be like 2 hours there, 5 hours there. No, you need to take care of yourself.
It's number one.
But also just this idea of success and the pressures of thinking the expectation for me is to achieve everything, which interestingly you had kind of commented on, means that you kind of lose out on the other
100%.
kind of stuff. Yeah.
What I would say to people who are really driving, you know, trying to cheat sleep, in the interest of...
But what do you say about people who just want to be the greatest in their job? Because there's so many folks, because of social media, 100%. They want to have the most followers, they want to have the most highest paid job, they want to have the biggest house, they want to have a range of cars.
Yeah.
You know, this Forbes kind of magazine lifestyle, and they're sacrificing so much else. How do you live for lack of a word, balanced life or good life? What is the good life to you, and where does mental health fit into that?
I would say 2 things. One, you will actually get further, bigger, more successful if you're not alone, and if you have the balance. And that leads into my next point, which is, in my opinion, to ultimately find something that is successful, making a difference, huge impact, it needs to outlive you. And, you know, if you think about some of the biggest community organizers, like their philosophies and their impact and their missions and their efforts were largely started or driven by them, but they had a crew. They had a posse, and many of their causes continue to this day, even if, you know, maybe their lives were taken, maybe, so I think often, for societally conditioned reasons, we feel like we have to do it alone. We feel like if we don't do it, who will? And there's literally like constant quotes about that, right? Like, if not you, who? If not now, when? And there's some truth to that of, like, if you have had this experience, speak about it. If you feel so strongly about something, it gets you out of bed in the morning, speak about it, start the thing, but find your people, because for sure, you're not alone, you're not the only person who's experienced it, for sure, get your people, and with more people around the table, the thing drives forward more. If you are gonna do the public speaking, who's gonna do the bookkeeping? Who's gonna run the budget? To be like, okay, so if our merch costs $30, whatever, how are we gonna make this thing happen?
I'm finding someone trying to help me with that right now, so completely,
Like, there's no way. You are an amazing person, and you're really good at a handful of things. and you're not so good at a handful of things,
but
someone else is,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, so imagine if that person comes in and is doing these things, not only do you not have to do them, but it's going to cost you 10 hours to figure it out. It's going to cost them 1.
Yeah.
So together, now all of a sudden you've created time because this person can do it better, stronger, faster. And you do this other thing, better, stronger, faster. Now, as an entity, you're driving forward way faster. You're going to reach more people. And should anything happen to any of you, or God forbid you want to take a vacation, the thing's still moving.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not hinging on, are you at your computer? Because the second you don't have time, or the second it's not gonna survive. So I think for actually the health of the effort, you need to find ways that not only can you take breaks for your own health, which is hugely important, but what happens outside of you, because it has to outlive you.
That's amazing. We need to focus on kind of thinking about the long-term future, legacy.
Yeah.
As you say, build a team
Yeah.
of people who can really support each other and do great things together. We don't have much time left, but before you go, I'd love to kind of know kind of what is going forward in the next 5 years. What is the social injustice you're really concerned about?
Yeah.
And sort of how, for people who are trying to address that, whether it be, you know, I mean, social justice in this sense is the idea of making society fairer and address society's problems, whether it be climate change, sexism, racism, health inequities, inequality. What is that big thing that you're worried about, you want to address? And also for people who are having to deal with that, how do you ensure that they keep strong?
So I felt really paralyzed for a long time because I cared about so many things and I didn't know which one to invest in. Invest time, energy, skill set. So if anyone resonates with that, I would say just choose. And it can be for right now. And for me, for right now, one is access to mental health. I think there is a massive financial barrier, and we are very committed to fighting that at MyWellBeing and creating more access. I also think there is a massive disparity, both for seekers of color, so people who are looking for care providers who understand their experience. How can they find that without having to over-explain lived experience or racism or sexism, etc.? They should share their own experience from the first person in therapy, but shouldn't have to explain, hey, what is sexism, what is racism in the workplace? Like that, we are training up providers to have a very thorough understanding of the foundation. And I'd also say, being a female founder, this is not something that I expected to come head to head with or knew that I would care about, but the disparity in funding that goes to women and goes to people of color is a huge problem. And right now, I'm pretty laser focused on mental health, but I could see in the future really wanting to help more women, help more people of color, really exponentially grow their businesses, whether it's through fundraising, whether it's through consulting. I'm pretty blown away that having worked at nonprofits, a lot of times there's some systemic inefficiencies, and the answer is almost always, oh, well, we're not Google, we don't have a whole lot of money. And to me, the less money you have, the more organized you need to be.
For sure.
You have to make more use of that dollar. You have no room, you have no cushion to spend more than you can afford to. So there's a couple things brewing there that I think I would love to really have more impact in that way moving forward.
Thank you, Alyssa. Can't wait to see you kind of going ahead with that, but also thank you so much for everything you've done. We've only known each other for a few days, really, a couple of weeks, but I've been in admiration of the way you hold yourself, the way you take care of other people, and just your vibe. You're cool, you're chill, but also clearly very experienced and intelligent and know your stuff. And so when it comes to mental health, make sure you reach out to Alyssa and all of her work, and we'll share all the socials on social media as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
Appreciate you.
Go. Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all of you who have become monthly supporters of the School of Social Justice. Your monthly contributions make a huge difference and allow us to deliver content which is educational and teaches people how to make a difference. If you want to become a patron as well, it's really simple. All you got to do is go to the schoolofsocialjustice.com website, then click supporters, and choose how much you want to contribute, whether it be £20 a month, a £5 a month, or a £10 a month. Let's go with a £10 a month. It's really simple. Put in your details, put in your card number, click pay now, and you become a supporter. Whilst £5 a month is not much individually, it makes a huge difference collectively. And if we get 2,000 patrons, we can independently deliver content to you every single week to help ensure that we fulfill this mission of training the next generation of Martin Luther Kings. Thank you so much to all of you who have become patrons so far. You've made a huge difference and allowed us to continue with our work. And if you do become a patron, thank you so much. Your support means a lot. Take care. Bye.